In March 1945, with Allied artillery closing in, an SS demolition order was issued without a location. It named only a device. The directive was absolute. Destroy the apparatus, its notes, and every trace of operation before capture became possible. Engineers reached a sealed chamber, still warm from use. Instruments were smashed, coils severed, fluids drained into pits of lime. The order warned that survival, not discovery, was the true danger. Continuation equaled catastrophe. Abwehr intercepts suggest the project began years earlier, hidden under banal procurement codes. Materials arrived in fragments, routed through unrelated offices. No invoice described the whole, ensuring ignorance even among senior administrators. A junior technician recalled pressure changes without sound and headaches within minutes. He was rotated out and reassigned. Medical logs list symptoms only. Exposure limits were measured in minutes, not hours. Time became the abstract antagonist. Production curves failed, fuel vanished, and leadership demanded leverage without scale. The device promised effect without fleets, outcome without numbers. That promise justified secrecy beyond normal bounds. Macro files mentioned tolerances measured in fractions of a degree and resonant bands drifting under load. Engineers warned stability could not be guaranteed. The response was not cancellation, but isolation. Human antagonists emerged as oversight narrowed to a single signature. Peer review requests were denied. Disagreement became disloyalty. Analysts later marked this as the irreversible turn. By late 1944, test intervals shortened despite warnings. Logs show anomalous readings flagged, then bracketed. A single note repeats across pages. Proceed. Physics waited while necessity argued. When bombing disrupted supply, power was rerouted from hospitals, labor shifted from defenses. The project consumed priority because it promised to rewrite outcomes already lost. The final directive ordered destruction from within. Charges were placed to collapse internal relationships, not scatter debris. The language avoided weapon. It called the object the condition, as if naming it completed it. Witnesses described the chamber as massively overbuilt, walls layered to absorb vibration rather than blast. This was not containment for force, but for behavior. Instruments were duplicated and triplicated, implying readings were expected to diverge under operation. An OSS memo flagged procurement anomalies. Ceramics rated for extreme heat without a matching process chain. Mercury compounds ordered without clear application. Analysts suspected a coupling experiment, not propulsion. The file ends abruptly, several pages missing. Micro logs show pulse cycles that displace nearby clocks by seconds. Engineers argued calibration error. Test repeated. Drift returned. Time itself refused synchronization once the apparatus crossed a specific threshold. A physician assigned to the team recorded tremors, metallic taste, and acute anxiety. He recommended suspension. The recommendation was stamped acknowledged and ignored. Exposure limits were lowered, then quietly exceeded. Institutional pressure intensified as defeat loomed. Oversight collapsed into silence. Project names changed weekly. Reclassification reset baselines, allowing instability to masquerade as novelty rather than failure. By January 1945, power draw exceeded forecasts. Transformers overheated. Emergency bypasses kept cycles alive. An engineer noted shutdown was harder than startup, underlining the phrase twice in the margin. Post-war interrogations captured only negatives. Survivors spoke of what it was not, what it must never do again. None described function directly. The restraint felt rehearsed, collective, and deeply internalized. A British survey of the ruins found demolition patterns focused on geometry, not destruction. Charges collapsed relationships between components rather than scattering parts. The intent was denial of reassembly, not evidence removal. One scorched note survived. If interrupted mid-cycle, isolate. The sentence trails off. No author. Investigators later concluded continuity mattered more than control, a warning rather than an instruction. A final brief cautioned against myth-making. It argued the danger was procedural, not explosive. Restarting without context could recreate the condition. The file closed, recommending permanent fragmentation of all related knowledge. Post-war analysts struggled to classify what had been erased. It fit no weapons table, had no delivery system, and produced no blast yield. The danger lay in behavior during operation, not in output, confusing assessments built on effects rather than processes. An OSS addendum proposed the device exploited resonance between coupled fields. It warned that partial reconstruction could recreate unstable states unpredictably. The recommendation was stark: never allow convergent insight across agencies or teams. Technicians reported a hum felt in teeth before instruments reacted. Operators learned to read bodies as sensors. When nausea spiked, cycles were cut. Data followed symptoms, reversing normal experimental discipline. As collapse accelerated, authority hardened. Safety offices were bypassed. Red lines shifted weekly. Cancellation would admit a mistake too large to manage, so continuation became policy despite compounding anomalies. Thermal readings dipped while power rose. Shadows bent at edges. Engineers argued calibration. Physics answered with repeatability. The abstract antagonists asserted indifference to intention, only to configuration. A fragmentary Soviet report later referenced a conditional apparatus destroyed by Germans themselves. Analysts suspected translation error. Cross-check suggested the phrasing was precise, not metaphorical. Demolition teams hesitated when initial charges failed. Only after isolating modules did collapse propagate. The delay implied interdependence across sections, confirming fears that the whole behaved differently than parts. After destruction, no radiation lingered. No residue marked the site. The absence frustrated investigators accustomed to signatures. Whatever existed left no conventional footprint once internal relationships were broken. A British brief warned that absence invites legend, yet it insisted the real risk was procedural. Reassembly without context could recreate the condition. Knowledge, not hardware, was the vector. Custody debates ended with dispersion. Findings were split, redacted, and siloed so no office could hold the whole. Fragmentation, once a cause, became the cure. Allied agencies argued over responsibility. No one wanted custody of an undefined risk. The apparatus was gone, but its shadow lived in reports stripped of diagrams, circulating as cautions without schematics or coordinates. Cold War planners absorbed the lesson quietly. Programs with unpredictable thresholds were split by design. Teams worked blind to one another. Secrecy architecture itself became an inheritance from a failure no one could name. Later audits noted recurring patterns: kill switches, isolation protocols, incompatible standards. These appeared abruptly after 1945. Suggesting a doctrinal shift driven by a single unspoken precedent. Human memory became the weak point. Surviving technicians were reassigned, resumes sanitized, interviews avoided specifics. Decades later, fear centered not on exposure, but on convergence. A 1952 interagency memo warned that merging partial insights could recreate unstable states unintentionally. Safety would be achieved through incompatibility. Progress would be slowed deliberately to preserve reversibility. Skeptics argued nothing substantive had existed. They cited missing hardware and absent data. Others countered that erasure was the evidence. The debate stalled, but policy followed caution. Occasional claims of rediscovery triggered immediate review. Each time, similarities tripped procedural alarms. Projects were dissolved early, not for failure, but for resemblance. By the late Cold War, references thinned. The lesson had been metabolized. Engineers learned limits as rules without stories. The cause no longer mattered, only the boundary. What survived was a principle without an origin. Never let all the pieces meet. Wholeness removed the option of reversal, and reversal was the only safety left. The weapon was never supposed to exist because existence itself proved uncontrollable once assembled. Fragmentation ensured it never could again. Archivists in the 1960s noticed synchronized gaps across agencies for the same months of 1945. Box numbers existed without contents. Indices pointed to shelves never built. The coordination suggested deliberate removal, not loss or neglect. A retired analyst recalled a briefing with no diagrams, only arrows and cautions. The message was simple. Convergence creates states you cannot unwind. No one asked what had taught them that lesson. Whistleblowers later hinted at failed starts in subsequent programs. Each followed the same arc. Early anomalies appeared, oversight intervened, teams were split, and the work dissolved into incompatible paths. Training manuals reframed success. Completion was no longer the goal. Safe incompletion became the metric. Programs were praised for how cleanly they could stop, not how far they could push thresholds. Historians searching for the object found nothing solid. What they found were policies shaped like scars, review gates, isolation rings, and kill switches that emerged abruptly after the war. Outside institutions, absence bred speculation. Legends filled the vacuum left by erased context. What had been destroyed to prevent recombination returned as myth, unbound by safeguards or restraint. Intelligence estimates warned that myths could pressure reconstruction. The paradox hardened. Hiding the truth reduced internal risk but increased external fascination, inviting the curiosity fragmentation tried to prevent. By the 1970s, the story thinned to a rumor of a rumor. Procedures remained. Safety culture had absorbed the lesson so fully that the cause no longer mattered, only the behavior to avoid. The human antagonist faded with time. The institutional one persisted. Systems learned to fear synthesis more than failure, preferring ignorance to coherence when stakes were undefined. The weapon that was never supposed to exist survived as a boundary condition, not an artifact, but a line drawn where knowledge must stop because crossing it once proved impossible to undo. In later declassification cycles, committees approached those boundaries and withdrew. Files were marked non-releasable rationale and passed over. The lack of explanation functioned as a lock, effective precisely because no one could describe the door. A former program manager admitted the fear was coincidence, not discovery. Separate teams solving adjacent problems might unknowingly recreate the same conditions. The risk lay in alignment, not intent or ambition. Engineering culture shifted accordingly. Elegance became suspect. Unified theories were treated cautiously. Systems that refused to line up were considered safer than those that promised coherence and control. Outside the system, writers searched for the missing weapon and found rumors instead. What institutions fragmented to survive? Culture recomposed as legend, stripping away the caution that had justified destruction. The loop hardened. Secrecy bred myth. Myth fueled curiosity. Curiosity threatened convergence. Each cycle justified deeper silence, widening the gap between internal restraint and external speculation. By the end of the Cold War, the device no longer mattered as history. Its impact lived on as philosophy. Avoid single points of synthesis. Prefer reversible paths. Never chase thresholds blindly. The final irony was procedural. The project was destroyed to prevent existence, yet its lesson ensured permanence. It rewired how dangerous knowledge is managed, even when the knowledge itself is gone. What was never supposed to exist could not be erased entirely. It persists as negative space, shaping choices through absence rather than presence, warning where archives fall silent. The last order was not to erase a machine, but to teach future systems where to stop looking, because some continuations cannot be survived once they begin.